What's up, boys? Today I'm going to be making a quick guide on how to get, simply just how to kind of understand and use camera locking, because this is probably the locking technique I'm most familiar with. I had like 26 different locks on my earlier transport. I might use some footage from that, but the big gist of it is camera locking. You click on a camera. Let me just place this here. You click on a camera, you click on a block, and it moves in reference to your main pilot seat. So if I would let's say my main pilot seat is right here. I have a little camera. I have a block over here. I click on this camera. Let's say I put a couple blocks in front of it that I want to angle. I click on this camera, I click on this block. These blocks will they'll aim towards this, but they also move 0.5. It's technically slightly less than half of a block forward. So, there's different aspects of it. So the first aspect is you can think of it just as a way to move blocks forward. You can place something like here, and you can place something here. You can put a block behind each of them that you aim them at. And if you think of it like that, you can technically move blocks almost a half block. So if you want to clip something together like a side, but you don't want it to be fully, how would I say this? You don't want any exposed lock. You can use that aspect of it, and that's one way to use it. But you don't typically use this. This is only on super small builds where you want to avoid any type of motor locking. The main aspect people use it is for angles, and if you're going to use it for angles, you also do have to take into account the fact that it moves a half block forward. You can clip it a half block back, or you can just clip another aspect is it moves in reference with your main pilot seat. So if you want to do something like that, you can also clip your main pilot seat back, and that'll basically negate most of the aspects of it, of the moving forward, but only in the forward direction, because it'll offset all the other things that might be moving in the side direction, back half block too. So I generally don't recommend doing that. The best way to do this is to think of each camera lock as individual. Don't try to avoid moving your main pilot seat around, because you got to remember that your main pilot seat is the thing that all this camera locking is going to move in reference to. And I guess it's time to start off quick building of me how I basically use camera locking. So I tend to start it off with the front of my plane. I'll build a rough outline of a nose cone. Let's say I want a little pyramid block in the front here, maybe. Now let's say I want something I want something longer than a wedge 1x4 block, let's say. Well, what I can do is I can place a bunch of these camera blocks around the edge of this, and then I can grab, let's say, we'll just grab a normal beam, a beam 1x4. And then we know it's going to move forward a half block, so we're going to clip them. Well, we're going to place some half blocks around it. And let's see what this looks like. The best thing is, the one big benefit about camera locking is upon spawn, it immediately lines up, and you can also very easily see, you can also line the cameras up very easily. It's very reliable, very straightforward. I click the camera here, anything that's connected to it will angle towards that block. And then I normally, I forgot. We have to move things in reference with our main pilot seat. So this is generally, oopsies, we've forgotten to fully clip it in. But yeah, what you're gonna generally be doing is pretty straightforward. Just clipping your main pilot seat down onto the rest of your build. Let's see, this one doesn't want to angle fully, so you gotta place something closer to it. This is generally. But the other big thing about camera locking is it's very trial. It's also trial and error, but I wouldn't say quite as much as other locking techniques. But that's kind of everything kind of has trade-offs. Another way to do this is to do everything like this. Avoid that half block entirely on the camera locked parts, compensating for the half block on the camera locked parts, and compensate for the half block difference on these bottom parts by clipping them back a half block. And this actually will end up give us slightly better results, because it's easier to place the block right on the end, where this is what we're all going to angle them at. So yeah, this is just initially what I start off with the build. The biggest pointer I would say to use for camera locking is to avoid trying to add camera locking directly onto the base of the build. You want to clip your main pilot seat downwards, and then because the big thing is, if you try to add camera locking on top of this, well, camera locking, you're losing out on an entire different aspect of it, where you can clip your main pilot seat down and clip all these extra angles which are pre-done onto the rest of this. If you try to do it on the base of it, number one, you're going to be working around a bunch of tight angles. Your cameras might like be grabbing onto the stuff. You basically will lose out on a bunch of extra base details you have. It's like trying to use angle locking without any clips, or like with only using half block clips. Like, imagine if you tried to like make an entire build without any motor lock strands and just used angle locking with like maybe one block or like half blocks. It would look nowhere near as good because, well, you're not clipping an entire another layer of your build down. You can only add small details or like singular angles. You can't clip that many angles on top of each other. So the recommended I would say this is the best thing you can do with camera locking, is to build the majority of your build down here, and then camera lock any angles you want to have, motor lock any camera locked angles you want down onto your build. Just start off with a motor locking strand, move it all the way up. For larger builds, I tend to build it up and then to the right, and then build my entire front of the cockpit over here, and then clip it all the way down. You can add extra, generally what I use camera locking for on builds is like the intermediate port, because imagine you have a bunch of blocks right here, let's say. This is where you want to get to. Now, let's say this initial nose cone part, you want it to look nicer than this. Maybe you want to angle a bunch of delta wings together, but you still want to get to this firm portion of blocking. Maybe it's like the outline of your build. Well, I recommend using camera locking for this intermediate part here, and you'll see it in a lot of my builds, but I don't really use camera locking in the initial nose cone or in this, or in like the final outline of my build. Let me spawn in my transport really quick to give you guys a good idea of this. So this is ST3 and the ST2 both use this similar, but as you can see, I don't have my main pilot seat over here. My main pilot seat is clipped up and to the right over here. So my main pilot seat is effectively clipped all the way to the right and then all the way down. My camera locking is all the way up here in this corner. You don't want your camera locking to be, if I made my camera locking directly on here, number one, where would I put it? Like, I can't really clip it. Like, if I want this side to clip to the side, well, I can't place my camera inside of here. If I try to place it here, it'd be touching these other blocks. If I try to clip it inwards, well, I can't do that because if I clip my main pilot seat this way, to clip this piece inwards, this other side's going to move off. Just the best way to do this is just clip up all the way over to your side, have all your camera locking here. And also showing you my nose cones, I don't recommend using camera locking in your nose cones. I recommend using motor 2 locking. Something like this is a simple motor 2 locking design I have, where I have like one key, and then a motor 2 that turns this piece. You don't really want to have, camera locking isn't a tool that you can really use in nose cones. You want to turn your nose cones and clip them together. Camera locking can't really turn stuff like this. Motor 2 locking or just angle locking is what you're going to want to use for your nose cone. And then you don't really want camera locking for all these extra angles on these sides. Like, why use a camera that just turns down and clips this to this, like clips an angle like this, when you can just use blocks to do it. So it's this intermediate portion. I have my motor 2 locked or motor 2 angled nose cone here, and then in this intermediate spot, it's all camera locking. Now, I would love to use camera locking on the very back of my build, but the problem is I can't do that because the rear of my build is so far back that unless I had some kind of second main pilot seat here that I could build in reference to for like just these like cameras, it would be a cool feature actually, but that doesn't exist in Plane Crazy right now. So what you have to do is basically only have, you can only really have camera locking on your build if your build is less than a plot long at most. Because if it's longer than a plot, how are you going to get the camera locking to go all the way back here when your build spawns in? You can't. Unless you try to have like a camera locking folded piece, which would just make no sense. Like, that wouldn't work. So I recommend using it on just the fronts of larger builds, and for smaller builds, let's use our Su-57. This thing's tutorial is going to be coming out soon. you can use it throughout the entire build. So where's our Su-57? Su-57. You see here, I actually use an additional aspect of camera locking here, which is the fact that if you aim it at a block, let's say I aim it here, and then I move the entire build upwards, this entire piece here will be clipped one block down. It'll behave as if this part was never moved upwards, basically. That's the best way to think it. So now that I've angled it and then I've moved everything up, this technically the game thinks that this piece right here, this camera and this entire piece is one block next to this rest of this. It won't behave as if it's welded to it, but once I spawn it in, it'll angle down like with the rest of it. I have another video called like it was called camera locking technique. It's an earlier video that goes over this more in depth, but it's pretty, that's another aspect that I don't recommend using though, because if you use it en masse, you basically have to have like an entire Just Dance forward back blank blocks pad on the corner of your build telling you the right things to do. So I don't recommend using it more than once or twice, but for this entire smaller build, you see, since it's less than a plot long, I can use camera locking all over this build. I have camera locking here, I have camera locking there. Each of these pink or blue blocks is something, actually except for these two, is something a camera lock is aimed at. So, like you see, this is a rear part of my build. I angled this down slightly. I want to angle these two sides here. Well, here's the thing. The biggest problem you're going to run into is your upper area where all the camera locked parts go is going to get crowded, because if you start adding enough camera locked parts, there's not infinite space up here. You can't just go up another set amount of blocks and then add more camera locking on top. Camera locking doesn't work like that. It's all in reference to your main pilot seat. So what you got to do is find ways to improvise and optimize space with the things you already have. You see, I want to have 2 extra angles that go from here to here, but how am I going to fit this? Well, I can fit them underneath the side of this thing. So I can have these 2 angles right here, angle forward to this, and basically rotate these sections around. You are going to have to keep in mind that it does move a 0.5 block outwards. So I have to, like normally, if this was just a motor, I can make it like this, because it's 3 blocks wide. This would turn down, there'd be a block space here, this would turn down, and it would, if both of them turned down like this, if there's a half block right there, they would all come together. But since it clips them outward first initially, I have to make them slightly closer together, effectively. So you're gonna have to keep that in mind. Camera locking is more of a skill that, if you're good at camera locking, you're good at using a lot of it in your build, and also being able to place new camera locks down while like estimating how it would work. Mostly, I would recommend just starting off with using a little bit of camera locking in this intermediate space between the very tip of your nose cone and then the second part of your build. I wouldn't recommend going in like full just, I want to use camera lock everywhere in this build like what I used with this one. I'd recommend using a little bit, maybe use it on a larger build, because that's a great way to get used to camera locking. Start off with a larger build with less amounts of camera lock, like my ST3. My epicenter of, I don't know what you'd call it, of camera locking is this thing. Where is it? It's the ST2. It has 26 camera locks, and it is insane. This is like basically the best you can do with camera locking. Every angle in this thing is basically camera locking, except for 6 angles that I had to use angle locking for, because it is longer than a plot. But you see, each of these pink blocks is a camera lock. There's camera locks all over this thing. I tried to use them everywhere I could. The entire wing, there's no, there's there's no angle locking in the wings. It's all camera locking. So you can do a lot with camera locking. Generally, there are more limitations on it. So you have to think around those limitations. But what you will receive is basically an ability to instantly, after you angle something, because you have to keep in mind that if you reload a build, you have to reset each camera lock up individually. Very painful process, but what you get in trade for that is very reliable. It's going to be the exact same angle each time you spawn it in. No lag, basically. You don't have to worry about spawning something in and then angling it, and then maybe if you have too many parts, the angle wants to bug backwards a bit. Don't have to worry about that. It's a very nice process to help spawn in larger builds and avoid lag, which is what I recommend, mostly for larger builds. But I use it. You can also use it in smaller builds to help reduce the amount of parts, because one camera lock, you see this one camera locked part right here where I angle it downward? This would probably take about 5 times the amount of parts. I would have to maybe add extra motor locking up here, add a motor, angle it down, maybe add like an extra motor here to clip it down a little bit more. It's much simpler just to have this, and it's also way easier to get an idea of. You don't have to worry about spawning in and then having the motor turn the wrong way. Click on your block, click on where you want it to be, and it'll angle like that. It's very straightforward. It rarely bugs, very any issues, but yeah. This is basically everything I use. My best explanation for using, or just kind of like a explanation for camera lock would be the fact that, remember to clip your main pilot seat up and somewhere outside of your build, put your main pilot seat here. Do you see this? This is basically the optimal stuff you can do with camera locking. My entire like cockpit part outside of my front nose cone is all the way over here, and all these angles are camera locked. So I have like an outer edge and then a slightly more intense edge, 1, 2, and then I have downwards edges. I have the sides of my cockpit angled inwards. You can do so much with this, so I would recommend, especially if you're like a newer player, to try to once you get like a basic understanding of how to lock motors, I would recommend trying to get into it. It'll be very useful. Just in anything, like you can angle your wings. It's very easy. So yeah, this is kind of a summit rant on how to use camera locking generally. It's not like magnet locking specific settings. You just click on your you click on the camera, you click on where you want. It moves in reference to your main pilot seat, so make sure you don't, if I had my main pilot seat here, it would all stick up here because it would be, they move in reference to your main pilot seat. If you clip your main pilot seat down, all the camera locking moves down. So this is kind of like a, more of like a rant type video, I guess. Yeah, like I said, but yeah, it's kind of just going over how you do this, and as long as you clip it stuff up to the side, you should be pretty much set. I recommend just experimenting around with a lot. It's pretty straightforward to get the hang of once you know that you can clip on a camera and click on the block and it points at it. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'm not going to be having many more of these rant type videos. Once I hit 1,000, we're going to go full on like videos every so often that are a little bit better produced. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you later. Like, comment, subscribe, and bye bye.